everyone, and welcome to the Hands-On CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to John Hathaway. With a long history in IT, today John is the VP of IT Security in Cambridge Savings Bank. John has over a decade of experience in tightly controlled industries, including healthcare, banking, and travel. So hearing about his perspective can definitely teach us a lot. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. So I'm really interested in hearing, this is your first official, or not first, but one of the first official security roles you've done, but you've done security for quite some time. So tell us, how does that work?
Yeah, so this is my first role dedicated to IT security, where my background is really as an IT operations generalist, in that whether I was doing the hands-on practitioner or operating in a leadership capacity, pretty much all those facets of IT, whether it's cloud systems, infrastructure, help desk, security, risk and compliance, everything that had IT purview in it was things that I had dealt with. And today, where I am with Cambridge Savings Bank, this is my first role that is really dedicated to the security function, where that can certainly go far and wide.
Perfect. And how does your day-to-day look like now?
So day to day is much like I think a lot of IT people will tell you, because I get so much from my background of just being in IT in general. I don't think the day to day is ever really the same, which is part of what makes us attractive and makes it not really boring, and keeps us on our toes. But things range from dealing with audit requests. As a bank, we deal with a lot of internal and external audits. We're dealing with various teams internally to address, if a website gets blocked, we have to address our content filtering and ensure that the URL is safe. We work on various projects to implement more secure and stringent baselines, such as the CIS, most up-to-date CIS benchmark, ensure that that's implemented across our environment properly. It's really a little of everything, and there are times where we may even have an incident akin to the CrowdStrike incident recently, where we wake up and all of a sudden we're tasked with having to handle something that reaches that degree of criticality.
So what made you interested in security in the first place?
Security in of itself is very interesting, because it, like IT, has an ever evolving landscape. The threats that people face, it's a cat and mouse game. The vulnerabilities become more complex. The solutions and the things that you have to do to protect your company against those threats are ever evolving. Much like related back to IT, where we're not just dealing with on-prem infrastructure, we're dealing with cloud and how that's evolved. So I think the interest in security was much like the interest that I had gotten into in terms of pursuing leadership roles after doing hands-on earlier in my career. So having done hands-on and leadership in IT operations, security has become a very hot niche. And so I've decided that from what I've dealt with in my career, I feel that that's something of interest that I'd like to dive deeper into, because it's something that I just have a greater interest in at this point.
What made you decide to get the certifications you got and just go really keep learning and digging deep, although it wasn't technically something you had to do?
Well, I think as a professional, really in any capacity, the certifications and such, for me, it's a function of just continuous learning. It's continuing to stay abreast of things and and continuing to stay relevant. So my inspiration to get my CISSP is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and where I've entertained the prospect of potentially just getting into security as a specific niche. I felt like with my 20 years of experience in IT, having that and having the CISSP was going to provide a really good foundation for me to be considered for roles. So with that, things kind of happened pretty quickly, having gotten my CISSP back in April, and then I found myself at a Cambridge Savings Bank in my current capacity just a couple months later.
Amazing. Now that you're in the security hat, do you find yourself feeling more often like the bad cop or like the person who needs to be like, we can't do this, we can't do this?
Yes, it's unfortunately it comes with the territory, but to kind of really qualify where I come from as playing the bad cop, I don't like to. I like to find opportunities to say yes. Like I like to find opportunities to help people achieve what they're trying to do, because there's no question that security becomes a detriment to productivity, but unfortunately, it is a necessity in today, and it's been a necessity for quite some time. You just have to have a pragmatic approach to how you approach solving a problem, essentially, which could go into any number of different specific examples. But so if you have to say no to something, it could actually just be that there hasn't been a solution properly vetted yet, and you can't just throw it in because you have a deadline that was yesterday.
Interesting. Have you ever been um well, you haven't been in security in the other companies necessarily, but were you ever aware of a serious breach or security incident that happened in one of the companies you were working at? And obviously, no names or anything like that, but how was it coped with?
Yeah. So I mean, to clarify, I really actually have served in the security capacity in terms of my generalist IT operations background. Just I haven't worked for a company as large, where there's the scope and scale of it really had a requirement of having a dedicated security team. But yeah, I dealt with an incident that uh, there were a number of email accounts, number of 365 email accounts that were compromised, and it was largely just because the company I worked for had a different perception of how well protected they thought they were, and the resulting fallout from that was really having to work around the clock with to implement a number of different things, whether it was writing a WISP they didn't have, implementing mobile device management, and pen testing and vulnerability management, because they just didn't have any of these um, programs in their environment. And it was at the same time that they were actually under hot water for other reasons. So to bring it all together, it's in light of that email incident where the accounts were identified as being compromised, it was basically having to fast track a tremendous amount of work and projects that typically take a lot of time. And that was just not a very fun endeavor for anybody.
That sounds quite a stressful period to have, probably. Interesting. So, do you think it's common for companies to assume they're much safer than they are?
I think so. And that's just because sometimes the business really just doesn't have the advocacy or the presence, at the key leadership positions in their company, whereby the real awareness and education and telling it how it is would really be put in front of them, so that they could actually truly understand. So, some organizations have the IT security or data security or just security in general adequately represented within the leadership ranks, and other companies don't.
And when you look at it now, and even in the past, how do you view education versus putting controls? Like, what is the balance between I'm going to teach my people to be extra safe and to think about security and to do all the right things? And on the other hand, I'm going to make sure that technically there is as little chance as possible for someone to make a mistake.
Well, for education, you really need to try to make it relatable. You can't just throw generic data security training at people, because people don't want to do this to begin with. So if you're able to put training in place that's relatable, and even maybe incentivize it by, if you pass with a certain score, or if you identify, if you're reporting X number of potential phishing emails for that are actually backed by a training campaign, you can offer Amazon gift card or whatever. I think that, and then having controls that again are easy to understand, and easy to follow, and easy to explain the relatable context as to why they're there. I think the balance of those things will go a long way in terms of achieving that proper balance, but also achieving the degree of buy-in that you can possibly get from your colleagues who are the users in this case.
What is one thing that you think people out of security don't really understand about security?
I think that with like a lot of things, if it doesn't affect them directly, like personally, I think that they just don't have an understanding for what the true consequence of a breach or an incident really means. So if you've never had your identity stolen, if you've never had your bank account drained because you were successfully socially engineered to give up that information, I just don't think that anybody can really truly appreciate something until you have a direct experience that you can internalize and say, oh yeah, that these other things that I'm seeing, that for the business, they're trying to protect themselves in a similar conceptual capacity. I have to protect myself to ensure that I don't give up my bank account information or my social security number or anything like that. And by the same token, my employer has to take the same type of measures to ensure that they don't get compromised in some form or fashion.
Interesting. Do you feel like there's a lot of handling stress when you're in a security role, especially in those situations where something might have gotten, maybe not even breached, but like was close?
Yeah, there is stress because, for a couple reasons. Number one, it depends on how, if your leadership team looking at the IT and security folks to say if the security, if the something happens, sometimes there's a blame and shame game that is not, it's just not productive, but it's also not, and sometimes it's just not really pointed in the right direction. Because in IT, we know that we constantly battle with having resources and tooling and advocacy to put the protections in place, and usually as a direct impact of not having those in adequacy will result in breaches or incidents or things that come very close to it. Whereas if Sally in accounting responds to the email from their CEO at their CEO's name at gmail.com, asking them to, wire some money over, or Amazon gift cards, whatever it is, that's there is definitely stress from kind of again, like a lack of understanding overall in terms of also how you really handle the reaction to those incidents. And you really have to, especially where ones are not in resulting in a direct impact or consequence. You really have to take it from a human perspective that this is a learning lesson, not so much blame and shame. Or it's certainly different if you're a repeat offender, but everybody makes mistakes and you never know what somebody's going through or dealing with, and in any respect. So that's my take on that.
That's really interesting. What do you think? What do you think is? What do you think are the main issues right now in cybersecurity? Like the things you think about most?
I think the main issues in cybersecurity are, I think first and foremost, just relative to what I've dealt with personally, and which I'm sure any number of other IT and security professionals deal with, is ensuring that they have the right advocacy and resourcing to have a respectable program that allows them to effectively do their jobs and do it reasonably well. there's security is a cat and mouse game. There's always always going to be new threats and everything. But I think what a lot of companies struggle with is really, I think what cybersecurity really lacks right now is just, even though it kind of is a cliche statement, I still feel that the education and awareness and the leadership levels to either, again, provide that advocacy for resourcing and tooling that is just, it's really just, that's what it costs to do business now. You can't just rely on built-in Windows Defender and having a having a firewall. There's so much more to it. So I think that's the biggest challenge. And I also think that in the regulatory landscape, I think that at least domestically, I don't think that the United States has enough appropriate regulation to protect people and hold others accountable. Whereas in Europe, you've got GDPR, which is very stringent and has very specific consequences for violations. So I think, off the top of my head, when I think of cybersecurity and what's the challenges, I look at it from the perspective of the business, and I also look at it from the perspective of just being an everyday person.
That's really interesting. So you have a lot of experience in like highly regulated industries. What do you, what are some of your takes like in terms of, is compliance enough? Is like, how do you view it?
So I guess I would take that question and look at it from the entirety of a business, and I think even some highly regulated industries, there are businesses that exist in the industry that still struggle to have excuse me, that still struggle to really have the security mindedness baked into the culture, and you still have even higher level executives that, or leadership folks, that try to circumvent the rules and the policies, the controls and things, or some form of shadow IT evolves, and you've got some unknown infrastructure you're dealing with, any number of different circumstances like that. And I continue to think that there's just a lack of really understanding. I also think there's a lack of culpability. Companies like Change Healthcare with that breach, and so many retailers like Target and Home Depot, who have also been subject to data breaches. There just isn't, those companies are all reasonably prepared to pay a fine that may not change the um, change the circumstance. They may not make required improvements based on the situation. So, those I think between again culpability for have it being responsible for an incident, especially where there's gross negligence involved, um, and again security-minded culture where you also kind of have to fight internal battles where you all would hopefully be working towards the same goal and having folks that are of that mindset. That's where I am on that.
Cool. What is one thing that you think security professionals sometimes overlook but should pay more attention to?
I think security professionals, are if you getting into security, I found a lot of folks are very, narrow-minded and focused on security. Like they're trying to build Fort Knox, and it's well intended, but they lack the understanding of business context as to why certain things have to be a certain way, and they also lack potentially they lack the um, who else is affected by that in IT and security. You're still trying to strike that right balance of security and usability. As I alluded to earlier, there undoubtedly security can be and is in a lot of cases a detriment to productivity, but it's really being mindful of everybody everybody who's a stakeholder, and the users, your colleagues who are just again Sally in accounting or whoever. They all have a job to do, and the most successful security professionals are going to be those who achieve the right balance of having strong security while enabling their colleagues to be able to do what they need to do as well.
How do you balance that? Like on the one hand, really making sure your space is like everything is happening the way it should security wise, but also enabling the business and communicating to management why certain things can't happen in a certain speed or why certain things can't happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, that question comes with a lot of it depends. There's just so much that is different. No two companies are the same, and a lot of industries are not the same. I think what you just said about communication and compromise, like when I think about, okay, you've got these things that you have from security. You've got your side that you have to advocate for. You got the user experience you have to advocate for, or that you're trying to facilitate. I think also a significant component of that is risk. It's risk assess. It's identifying, assessing, and treating the risk of whatever scenario is put in front of you. And if you have compensating controls to mitigate certain circumstances, and I think that the having a thorough discussion in talking through a scenario is going to end up finding the right compromise, the right balance of what you can do, what you can't. And so again, there's no way to really be specific about that, but that is about as specific in terms of an approach I would take to try to handle most scenarios that are put in front of me.
So, what do you think is one blind spot many CISOs have?
Well, so that's an interesting question. I would actually reframe that to say, what is one blind spot that business leaders that have security under their purview, what is their blind spot? Because not every organization, I think I mentioned it earlier, like not every organization has C-level representation, or even even to senior levels of management in the company, in a company. So there's two things that I think are very important. First of all, having an honest, like having an accurate perception of what your capabilities are to protect your company from all the threats. Like what is your real baseline? And I think a lot of businesses have a false sense of what they have, or what they think they can do. And from that, I would say that the other, so that there's the component of how well can you protect against common threats or even evolving threats. But the other thing is while you may be successfully protecting against threats, um, are you also prepared? Like, this is the part two. Are you prepared for an incident? Like, do you have an incident response plan? Do you have run books, communication plans, things of that nature that will detail what you do? Because again, flying by the seat of your pants on that is not something that you can do. So you need to be able to effectively and efficiently deal with an incident, to contain it, and then do the needful as far as communication to impacted stakeholders, whether it's outside or internal folks. So I think those two together are important, and I would strongly recommend for those who either kind of are actually starting to scratch their head. I would strongly encourage, even though it's a small investment in the grand scheme, but I would highly recommend having an assessment done of your business and your IT security, and the ability to respond to incidents, and the ability to protect yourself, so that you can get a sense of where you are against a maturity model like CIS or NIST or whatever. So I think that's an excellent question. I would strongly encourage, if there are other business folks that just happen to be listening to this, it's just a good question, good thing to ask and raise, because in this day and age, um, again, there's just now, you can't rely on Windows Defender to do anti-malware for you with just firewall. That's not enough. You need to be tooled and resourced in a lot of different areas, because the threats are just omnipresent in so many different ways. That's all important.
Right. How do you think cybersecurity changed over the past few years? Like, what was it like 5 years ago, 10 years ago versus now?
Well, I think the motivation has certainly changed. I think that there were script kiddies who were, oh wow, look, I can penetrate this company's weak security, and I'm like, I'm a prodigy for my age, things like that. Now today, it's all about the ransomware and um, the financial gain, that if somebody pays the demand to have their content decrypted, if the threat actors even do the decryption. I think that's been a material change. And something else I mentioned earlier about the regulatory climate, I think that there has been slow but some movement forward with things like GDPR and CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act. There are some, Europe and California, in these respective examples, have taken strides to advocate for people, and that makes businesses who have certain data elements, they've put requirements in front of that to be, something you need to be in compliance with, and if you're not, then you're going to face consequences for it. So I think those two things. And then of course the the answer that's always thrown out in like a broken record is, yes, the threat landscape has continued and will continue to become increasingly complex and pervasive.
Does AI concern you?
It does. AI is a double-edged sword. AI is a tool that has so much potential to make a big difference in um, productivity and enabling capability within a business. But at the same time, AI is also, um, if you inadvertently put customer data or proprietary data into it, it gets absorbed into the large language model and it's learned and it's no longer private. So AI and its implementation are concerning, but I think a lot of the concern about AI is AI in its as it's known today is still very much in its infancy, and people fear the unknown. So there hasn't you have to kind of it's tough to sometimes you get competitive advantage by being the first to tackle something, and other times being the first to market um, is a big risk that can have a significant consequence. And I think that a lot of companies and a lot of industries have determined that their AI posture is just something they have to be very very diligent about, because they've seen what it can do, and what the potential consequences of not handling it appropriately are.
Interesting. Do you have any prediction of where it's going to go? Like both AI and cybersecurity?
Um, yeah, I think AI is not going anywhere. I think AI is. I think over time, I think AI will, as it is now today, like there are companies that are implementing AI capability to enhance their tools. Um, there are tools like Mimecast, for example, doing email and spam protection. They're they have an AI component that looks at underlying data and can actually then go and basically tell you received this email that came from an external person, and their AI intelligence went and actually did a domain lookup to say, oh well, hey, this domain was registered recently, so this actually could be a fly by night kind of operation. And then you've got this banner on your email that provides useful information to protect you. Um, so there's utility in AI. Um, so I think the business world is going to kind of slowly, but I think the business world will continue to adopt AI. I think with its evolution, I think some of the AI, I think uh, large language models will I think there will be more homegrown large language models instead of having to leverage the ones like ChatGPT and Gemini and others like it to protect. And I think that over time it'll be easier to build those and then leverage them for their business. So you know, bringing that all together, again, there's utility that AI will be useful for, but then on the other side, I think AI will evolve slowly, but in practicality, where I think companies will be able to develop their own AI proprietary capabilities without having to necessarily leverage what is now the largest knowns of the chat GPTs and such.
Got it. Do you currently have a team of security people, or is it you managing the entire security?
I have a team of 5. So with me, that's 6. Yeah, we're an organization that is certainly large enough to have a dedicated security team, and and the guys kind of do it all. We're still small enough where we've got a lot of generalists doing a lot of different things, but not too. We haven't grown to the scale of like having necessarily a dedicated person for a dedicated function yet.
Interesting. And what would you recommend anyone who is looking to get into cybersecurity or wanting to enter in, or even advance in the field?
Um, I think people getting into security, I probably have a slightly different take on that. I guess an analogy I could use in the music world is that you don't become a musician who sells out stadiums and arenas overnight by taking a couple of lessons to play the guitar and taking a couple vocal lessons from a teacher. It takes time, it takes experience, it takes things of that nature to really understand or to gain the experience of where you've got the everything you need to become that musician that sells out and becomes that popular. There's in terms of taking on security as a getting into it. There's a lot of college programs and a lot of advertisements that basically say there's a path in, and it's quick and it's easy. But my thing is, I don't think that I would be as effective in my capacity if I didn't have the underlying experience that I have. I started in the help desk where I got to see from the user's perspective. I saw what they're clicking on. I saw where they save things. Got a good feel for what they were doing on their side of the computer. And then on the sysadmin side, network admin side, I got to see the back end. I got to see the configurations. I got to kind of see what it looks like, to see what this means in terms of what the users are doing and how it translates on this side. So with that, I'm of the mind that I think it's the most practical advice. It's not to say you have to spend 20 years in IT to get into security, but I think it's important to get some degree of practical IT operational experience in some capacity, because to your question earlier about what do some security folks not think about, or paraphrasing what that question was, and I said they lack the business context. There's a lot of angles from which they're going to miss visibility or miss how to evaluate something. So for me, I think the totality of my experience allows, and I'm not saying I know it all, I never know it all. I'm just saying that having some degree of practical experience to then get into security so that you can look at it from all sorts of different angles and not just some unilateral or like textbook taught, which textbook and experience are two different things. I think that my advice is to get some degree of practical experience and then explore what facets of security interest you. Talk to people, network, get a mentor. I think those are things that are very important towards positioning yourself the best to get into the field.
Do you remember any time, maybe in the recent past or maybe a long time ago, where you made a leadership or a security decision that ended up being maybe not the best decision? And then how did you deal with it? How did you fix it?
I'm sorry. Would you restate that question, because I want to make sure I understand the right context?
Yeah, of course. So I was asking, do you remember any time, either in the near past or years ago when you were much younger, do you remember a situation where you made a decision about either leadership or security that ended up being a not so great decision? And then what did you do to fix it?
Um, I think that if I were thinking back to a decision I made that wasn't necessarily the best, I think that I think it really comes back to what I said about advocacy and resourcing and tooling, in that I may not have made the best. I didn't do as much as I probably should have to really fight the battle to advocate for the resourcing that I needed. And I think that the consequence that that had for me is, I made reference to in the question you asked about, what was without naming companies or whatever, what was the worst security incident that I've either had to deal with or whatever. I've had, other environments where without advocating for the additional resourcing, it put more on the shoulders of myself and the team that I had to still meet expectations of getting things done by a certain time or whatever, where those expectations may not have actually been reasonable to begin with. So, I think that if I had fought a little harder potentially, or maybe try to think of a way to, if I couldn't get an additional body, maybe bringing in, trying to advocate for an outside company to come in for an engagement, which would be far less expensive than having a dedicated full-timer. I think that's probably the issue, and then the consequence that came from it.
Great. One final question that is actually a two-part question. But before that, I want to say thank you so much for your time and perspective. I feel like you bring a lot of like a different energy because you have so much experience in another field. Like the way you look at things is very from that view, and I think that adds like an important layer to it. So thank you so much. Okay, so my final question is, what gets you excited about cybersecurity versus what keeps you up at night about cybersecurity?
I think what's exciting about it is, again, that cliche answer that there's always something new. There's always going to be new, from the cat and mouse game. There's always going to be new threats to protect against. There's always going to be new battles to fight, and and from that's just keeps it interesting, and that's what's exciting to me, because I'm not the type, never have been the type where I like to just kind of do the same thing every day. The thing that keeps me up at night is, I think even in my current environment, I think we have a lot of great tools. I think we have a lot of great process and procedure and things of that nature that prepare us to not only deal with an incident that may not become an incident, or I'm sorry, it allows us to be adequately prepared to protect our environment, but it also has left us prepared to deal with an incident and have a playbook or run book so that we're not flying by the seat of our pants to deal with something. We've got a lot, so we've got a lot great with that, but there's always a concern that you miss something. There might be just like one misconfiguration that was missed, and that could be the one thing that allowed somebody to get in. That's what kind of keeps me up at night. But I think, so that's for my current situation, and I would just generally say, as far as keeping me up at night, I would think just from the experience I've had in my career, what keeps me up at night is, even though there's only so much time in the day and so much you can do, it's still really hard to deal with the fallout, because you still ultimately have to deal with the fallout in circumstances where you're not provided the resourcing and the tooling and advocacy that you really need, which again goes back to the business. So that's where I am on what keeps me up at night, but what keeps it exciting at the same time.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I really, really enjoyed this.